You've muted yourself, Wayne, so we can't hear you. We can see your screen though.
Here I am. I'm not sure how I muted myself. Apparently, I have skills I was not aware of. So we updated the IP policy in July of this year. We've been working on these changes for some time. Many of you have already seen some of the impacts of those changes. Um, the we've set a goal of having by the end of the year having our documentation and our systems, supporting systems updated, and we're on track. There'll be some additional work in the new year, and this is something that we continually do work to try and improve. Um, some of the highlights of this IP policy change. The EPL, the Eclipse Public License, is no longer special. I found this one's actually been true for a while. The Eclipse Public License has been a license that we think is great, and we certainly recommend it. But for actually as long as I've worked at the Eclipse Foundation, we've actually had projects under different licenses. The Eclipse Foundation was originally envisioned as a single license foundation, and that has not actually been true for quite a while. It was baked into our IP policy, and it did result in a lot of our due diligence processes being impacted by that or influenced by that. The notion of approved licenses, for example, was based on licenses that we believed to be compatible with the Eclipse public license. And that's again, that doesn't apply generally. That's the one of the, as we've branched out and we have projects using other licenses. In particular, we actually have projects using the GPL now in various capacities. The notion of having a single approved licenses list doesn't really make sense in the general case. Fortunately, it still actually really makes sense in about 90% of the cases. So that generally, that makes it a little bit easier for us. But there, this actually adds some challenges, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those today. We are focusing our energies entirely on license compliance. This again speaks back to the notion of having licenses on an approved list. It used to be that we went to the board of directors every time we encountered a license that we had not seen before, and we needed to have approval from the board of directors to use a new license. Now we have, with this IP policy change, within the EMO, within the Eclipse Foundation itself, we can evaluate licenses and determine whether or not we believe they are something that is compatible, right? Again, and our focus is entirely on, do these licenses actually work together in a legal sense? It's not a matter of, do we think, do we like these licenses or not? It's entirely, do they work together? So that's a bit of a bit of a change, and again, a pretty it's a bit more of a burden, I think, than it's easy than it's a bit of a burden. The Again, the challenge is for 90% of our projects, this is relatively straightforward. We continue to do what we've always been doing, but again, as different licenses are leveraged by projects, this problem becomes more interesting. We have projects now that have Apache license code that assembles components that are GPL code. There's no actual linking between the two. And which again, interesting combination. The GPL and the Apache license are licenses that generally can, everybody seems to believe that they don't work together. I should be careful here. This is more complicated than in a simple statement. But just because licenses aren't necessarily compatible together, we need to look a little harder at how they're actually being used and whether those combinations make sense, I guess, is the bottom line here. We can, one of the offshoots of this is we used to just assume that one Eclipse project could consume the contents produced, or the artifacts produced by another project. this isn't necessarily the case. Again, most of the time it probably is. Eclipse platform project consuming content from the eGit project, that just works. But saying, hey, we're going to pull content out of Oniro or Adoptium, that may not make sense. Again, it depends on what they're actually doing. So some changes that are occurring. We're eliminating the manual record keeping requirements. This effectively, this is the IP logs. This is things like creating CQs. These are no longer required. We have for a long time we've accepted the Git log, and we've actually leveraged the Git log as a source of information for contributions. That will certainly continue. We have revoked, and actually this is one of the things that I need to finish up by the end of the year, remove it from the website, the existing policy on the guidelines for the review of third-party dependencies. This is the document which describes things like works with and exempt prereqs and those kinds of things that you may have heard about. Those kinds of things in a context of, do the licenses work together? We actually shouldn't need those things. So anyway, that policy is no longer applies. We deprecated IPzilla and the notion of CQs. I would be very happy if we stopped using the term CQ or contribution questionnaire. If you continue to use it, I will accept it begrudgingly. I will smile, but I'm very hopeful that at some point we stop using those words. Internally we just talk about them as IP review requests or tickets or issues. We've in place of IPzilla, we've created something called IP Lab. We will provide pointers, or we have been providing pointers to this, and we'll continue to provide pointers to this. IP Lab is based on GitLab. One of the things that I quite like about this is GitLab is, we keep GitLab much more up to date than we've ever been able to keep IPzilla. And the more I use GitLab for these purposes, the more I like it and the more I don't want to look at IPzilla anymore. But our goal is by the end of this year, so December 21st, nobody is using IPzilla anymore. And we've been trying to clear out the backlog in IPzilla in hopes that we can just shut it off. And in the meantime, committers have been picking up and moving over to IP Lab, and that seems to be going well. So if you haven't had this experience yet, then you can contact the EMO team and we can help you with it. Or again, just follow some of the pointers and we'll see. Hopefully we've provided enough documentation there that you can figure it out. I did mention we're eliminating the requirement for IP logs. This is so the IP log was a process that we had followed as part of a review. Project team would submit an IP log as part of that review that we would look over and make sure was accurate. We used the IP log review as an opportunity to just validate that project teams were tracking intellectual property contributions to the project correctly. And we will continue to do that part. No doubt you've heard much talk about SBOMs. We've been focusing a lot of attention on using SBOMs. The fact is that we have done some form of software bill of materials from the beginning. This has been a requirement since forever. If you are doing Eclipse platform plugins, you've had about files and notice files. These all describe licenses and provenance and copyright of the content that is produced into the projects. This is all effectively the same thing as an SBOM. What we're looking at, though, is being more formal and following evolving standards. We're involved with the SPDX folks. We have a number of projects that are working with Cyclone DX. These are standardized SBOM technologies and formats that we're looking at. Today, projects are using notice files, which again, not a great, they're not these formats, but sorry, I'm saying not a great. They're very standard. The whole notion of a notice file, which describes the different content that your project leverages, is very, kind of very normal. But again, we're evolving to this notion of using more standardized formats. And we are looking very specifically at tools to help with this. One of the things that we've discovered along the way is this notion of SBOM. There's different kinds of software bills of material. The bill of material of things that are in a repository is different from the bill of material of things that are in an artifact. We're focusing a lot of attention on making sure that we understand what's in the repository and referenced by the repository. The notion of having a software bill of materials for individual artifacts is something that's very specific to the particular technologies and projects, and something we are looking at in combination with the security team is also looking at some of this. So we're trying to figure out how we help projects build some of these things. We are leaning much more heavily on automation. Our goal is to try and automate 80% of intellectual property work. And we've had some success. Unfortunately, I haven't had taken the time and energy yet to measure our success rate on automation, but we are trying to make sure that we automate as much as is possible all of the easy things, and allow everybody, including our IP team, to focus on the hard things. And again, we've had a great deal of success. We have the Dash license tool, which large number of you have discovered, which has the ability to vet intellectual property based on build technology. So from a Maven POM file, we can find out all of the things that are in there, identify the licenses for all of the things. And in those cases where we don't understand or don't have information about the licenses of content, the Dash license tool provides a means to automatically create review records, which gets sent to the IP team. There's some automation that automatically scans content. The IP team reviews things that need to be reviewed, and their results get fed back into the system. So next time you run the tool, every time you run the tool, you should get better results. I'll caution you that every once in a while you get worse results. Because every once in a while the data changes, right? So as our understanding of licenses of content changes, sometimes we the tool may report something different when you run it again differently, because again, we depend on these sources of data that shift. And the quality of the data improves over time. Just sometimes the answer it provides may not be what you want to hear. Anyway, I can talk more about that. I'll set up, I can answer questions about that, and I'll set up future talks to talk more about how the Dash license tool works. We're also spending a great deal of energy on implementing something called the open source review toolkit, OSS. So ORT, pardon me, the OSS review toolkit. You'll hear us refer to ORT. What ORT does, or what we have ORT doing, is it automatically grabs all of our repositories one at a time. It grabs all of the project repositories one at a time, scans them. As part of their scan, it identifies builds and it identifies scripts that pull in third-party content, scans that third-party content, and basically produces a report that says, here's what we found, license, basically automates, license hits and whatnot. And it also generates an SBOM in both SPDX and Cyclone DX formats. So the idea here is that we have this IP automation running all the time. And our goal, our hope is that for at least for a lot of projects, you only will need to think about intellectual property when we discover something and we need your help to resolve it. So again, the idea is we've got this tool and we have great hopes, and so far the results have been very promising, that it is just automatically scanning everything for intellectual property concerns. It also scans for things like security concerns too, which we will um, find means to feed back to the projects to make sure that when it's identified that a project is using third-party content for which a CVE has been identified, we'll make sure you have that information. Again, results have been good so far. Certainly projects that are Maven based or NPM based that have well-defined build scripts, having a POM file that just works makes this really easy. If you have a contorted set of steps to go and grab third-party dependencies and whatnot, there's only so much that we can do with automation. Ultimately, we will still depend on committers to understand what they're doing. So if you have a build script that goes and grabs some random JavaScript and then drops it into some random location in some very custom way, we would still need you to tell us about that and interact with us to sort out how that works. But again, ultimately, we're hopeful that for upwards of 80% of our projects, we should be able to automate most of the intellectual property review process. So again, automate all of the things is kind of what we're trying to do. This change brings the Eclipse Foundation in line with what we observe the rest of the industry doing. We still think that our intellectual property review process is is better than what other open source foundations are doing, certainly, and what most organizations in general are doing. You still have great confidence in the information that we are capturing about content. By using automation, by looking at ORT, by making scanning the easy things easy, we are increasing our ability to scale and generally just reducing the burden on committers and on our team, which again just makes everything. Reducing the burden on committers has always been a goal of ours, and we're really happy that we've been able, with the Dash license tool and now with ORT, we've been able to, I believe, make it relatively easy well, certainly compared to the way it has been in the past, make it easier for committers. And then, of course, getting rid of old infrastructure and whatnot has been another goal. I've been wanting to get rid of IPzilla for some time, and I'm glad that all of the different things have come together to a point where we've been able to do that. So anyway, that is the formal portion of the talk. I'm going to stop recording, and then I will